Chapter 1. The White Shadow in the Mist. In the English countryside, where the border between autumn and winter is marked only by the smell of rotting leaves and the howling wind through rows of bared trees, there lies a small village tucked deep in a mist-covered valley. Every morning, the sun struggles to break through the thick fog, where light and shadow mix like milk poured into tea. At the end of a narrow dirt path, stretching across soggy brown fields and wild hedgerows, stands an old wooden shed that has been abandoned for years. It sits there like a silent witness to time, its wooden planks rotting, its tiled roof collapsed, and wild ivy growing over it as if nature itself were trying to swallow it whole. No one in the village remembers exactly when the shed was last used. Some say it once housed horses, others claim it was for sheep, but whatever the truth may be, the shed remains there, lonely and forgotten. The village children never dare to go near it. They call it the mouth of the night. Whenever strong winds blow through, the creaking sounds from inside echo out, as if something or someone were still stirring in a deep slumber. On a freezing morning in October, Edward, a skinny farmer in his 60s, stepped out of his red brick house to check on his turnip crop. That was when he noticed something strange in the air. The crows that usually perched on the fence were gone. Not a single sound, even the wind had gone still. And then he saw it, a white figure sitting motionless on the highest beam of the old shed. Two round eyes, black and glinting in the dim light, stared straight at him. An owl, but not the usual gray kind found around these parts. This one had feathers as white as the first snow of the season. With soft gray edges like charcoal dust, it stood out in an uncanny way against the decaying, shadowy backdrop. It did not move all day long, almost as if it were part of the shed or worse, a spirit guarding it. And when night fell and the moon peeked over the treetops, Edward could still see the white figure perched silently on the beam. Not flying away, not sleeping, as if waiting for something. The second day, the third, and then an entire week passed, and the owl did not leave. Despite the cold winds, the drizzling rain, or the rumble of carts rolling down the dirt road, it remained. Whispers began to spread through the village, slipping through half-closed wooden doors and steaming cups of afternoon tea. Some said the white owl was a bad omen, a messenger of misfortune. According to old folklore, some of the elders murmured, "That is no owl, it is the spirit of someone who never left this world." A few curious young folks tried to approach the shed, but the bone-chilling air around it made them turn and run. Only Edward, with a gaze that mixed curiosity and doubt, dared to linger longer. He had lived his whole life on that land, knew every bird call, every patch of soil, and even the silence of nature. But this silence, it felt wrong, as if that old shed were hiding a secret, something deeper. Further away, something invisible to the eye. And the white owl, quiet as the shadow of night itself, was the guardian of that secret. Chapter 2. Owl Eyes in Darkness. Edward began approaching the old shed every day, as if it had become a new habit. At first, it was just to confirm the owl was still there, but soon he started bringing binoculars, standing at a safe distance where he could watch without scaring it away. Each time he took a few steps closer, the owl would slowly turn its head. Its eyes, dark and glassy like polished obsidian, never blinked, never wavered. They simply followed his every move, as though it were reading his thoughts. It made no sound, never flapped its wings. It was unlike any owl he had ever seen. Its silence was not an absence, it was a presence. One morning, Edward decided to take action. Quietly, he brought a long stick and nudged open the rotting door with his shoulder. Inside was a world of straw dust, cobwebs, and swirling cold air that whispered like voices. He looked up, and the owl was still there, perched on the old beam. Wings slightly spread as if ready to fly, but unmoving. Edward tapped the wall with the stick, then pointed it at the owl and said, "Go on, this is not your place." But it did not move. The next day, he tried blowing a loud whistle and clapping his hands. Still, no reaction. Those eyes stared at him as if he were the only one who had not yet understood what was really going on. And then one night, when the fog rolled in thick as foam across the fields, he could not take it anymore. He put on a heavy coat, grabbed a flashlight, and quietly made his way to the shed in the dark. The beam of the flashlight cut through the cracks in the wooden planks and landed on the owl's body as it stood silently. Its wings slightly drooped. The sudden brightness made its eyes glint like embers buried in snow. It did not fly away. Edward felt something almost human in the way it looked at him, a kind of pain. Or maybe a warning. His hand tightened around the flashlight handle. When the light swept down to the straw-covered floor, he suddenly noticed something moving, very slightly. Something small passed briefly within the beam. His heart skipped a beat. He bent down, brought the flashlight closer to the ground, and just as the light neared, the owl abruptly spread its wings wide, dipped low, and blocked his view. It let out a hoarse, deep cry that rumbled like wind echoing through a mountain pass, not to attack, but to stop him. A clear warning. Edward stepped back on instinct. For the first time in his life, he felt like an intruder, not just in nature, but in something more sacred. He stood frozen in the shed, the light trembling in his hand, his heart pounding like war drums. The owl did not fly, it just stood there, wings outstretched, like a mother protecting something behind her. There was something beneath that straw, and Edward began to suspect. The owl was not there by accident. It was guarding, and what it was guarding was not territory, it was a living secret. Chapter 3. The Truth Beneath the Straw. That night, Edward could not sleep. The image of those white wings blocking his light, those deep black eyes full of warning, clung to his mind like the shadow of an oncoming storm. He could not stop wondering, what could make a wild creature, whose instinct is always to flee, choose instead to stay and face? The next morning, while the fog still clung to the fields and the sun had barely painted a soft orange line on the horizon, Edward returned to the old shed, this time bringing something he had never carried before: trust. He left the flashlight behind. No stick, no voice calling out, just himself, two bare hands, and patience. He sat down at the threshold and silently looked up at the owl, still perched on the beam above. No one spoke, no one moved, a morning that stretched on like a lifetime. And then, on the third day of quiet waiting, Edward once again saw movement beneath the straw. This time, he did not reach for a light. He crouched low and moved closer, one step at a time. The owl watched him, but did not fly away, nor did it block him. Still, its body tensed, trembling. A tiny sound came from near his feet, faint, hidden in the breeze, a high-pitched squeak, soft and incomplete. Edward dropped to his knees. Beneath the damp straw was a nest, but not a soft nest lined with feathers and roots. As one might expect, it was makeshift: a few dried twigs, rotting leaves, and old straw, and at the center, freed tiny creatures, featherless, pink, and shivering in the chill of October. Free baby owls. Edward held his breath, his heart, long accustomed to the steady rhythm of farmland, the planting and harvesting, tightened in his chest like someone had gripped it. They were so fragile he could see their little bellies rising and falling with each weak breath. One of them had not even opened its eyes. The mother owl, he was now sure she was the mother, lowered herself. No longer threatening, but quietly standing near the nest, watching his every move. Her eyes no longer warned him, they pleaded. Edward saw it then. One of her legs was bent at an unnatural angle, likely broken or lost. She leaned to one side each time she shifted, trying not to place weight on it. Maybe it was an injury from a trap, or a fight, or something brutal and wild deep in the woods he could not even imagine. And still, with that damaged body, she had flown to this broken shed, not to find shelter for herself, but to guard these three fragile lives from the cold world outside. Edward backed away and sat down hard on the cold ground. His hands trembled, not from the wind, but from the weight of a choice that had begun to take shape in his mind. Should he intervene? The instinct of someone who has lived his whole life close to nature is always to let things run their course. Birth, death, survival, all are part of the unbreakable law. If he interfered too much, the mother owl might panic and abandon her nest, but if he did nothing, the babies would die, from cold, or hunger, or to the claws of a fox or rat in the night. All afternoon, Edward sat in front of the shed, deep in thought like an old sentinel. In his calloused hands were pieces of straw he had taken from inside, fragments of small, quiet lives left vulnerable in a harsh world. And when twilight came again, with pale purple light swallowing the tree line. He went inside, turned on his desk lamp, and began to sketch a simple design with pencil on brown paper for a wooden nest with a roof, ventilation, and a narrow entrance just big enough for the owl to come and go, but too small for predators. A shelter, not to tame, but to offer a chance. The next day, Edward installed the wooden nest inside the shed, placing it near the beam, close enough for the mother owl to see what he was doing, but far enough that she would not feel threatened. He did not touch the owlets. He said nothing. He simply worked, quietly, as if he and the owl were building something together, without words. That night, he placed a few small pieces of chicken meat near the nest, then stepped away. By morning, the meat was gone, no blood, no sounds, just a small trail in the dirt, a bird's claw mark. The next day, he left more meat, this time, closer, and again, it disappeared. It was no longer a question. It was an understanding, fragile, but real, between the lonely man and the wounded wild creature. A silent agreement had taken shape. A mission had begun, not one given by anyone, not for glory, but for the sake of 3 tiny lives and a fierce, unwavering mother's love. Chapter 4. Wind and Trust. November arrived like a cold breath in the dark. The wind turned harsher, the fields lay bare, and the trees screamed in dry rasps as gusts whipped through the woods. In that thick, biting cold, Edward continued building the owl's shelter, steadfast and quiet, like a man tending the flame of something sacred. Each night, he left food behind, never too close, never abrupt, and the mother owl, Edward had started thinking of her as she no longer looked at him like an intruder. Her eyes, once sharp and cold like midnight stones, had softened, not from losing vigilance, but as if recognizing something different in him. One evening, Edward arrived later than usual and found the beam empty. His heart clenched. Had she left? But when he stepped inside the shed, he saw her on the ground near the wooden nest. The 3 owlets were curled inside, and the mother was gently placing bits of straw through the cracks with her beak, a rare sight. As owls rarely build nests, Edward stood still, in the soft yellow light of the flashlight slung across his shoulder. The scene stole his breath, a wild creature, in a crumbling place, accepting the presence of a human as part of her effort to nurture life. And then, that night, the wind changed. The storm came without warning. On the radio, they said it was one of the fiercest storms in the past 20 years. The wind screamed across Edward's roof like a banshee. Doors shook, branches slammed against the walls. But just as he was about to latch the window, he looked outside and saw the roof of the old shed peeling away. Plank by plank, pieces of wood flying. The old roof could no longer hold. He did not think, he just moved. Edward threw on his coat, grabbed his flashlight, and ran into the rain that cut like knives. Each step sank into the cold mud. He crossed the yard, shoved open the shed door as it flapped wildly like a broken wain. The wind struck his face like ice. In the flickering beam of the flashlight, he saw the wooden nest shaking violently. On the verge of splitting apart, the mother owl circled overhead, panicked, not fleeing, but flying loops, trying to help. Edward hurled himself over the nest, using his thin frame to shield the tiny creatures inside. Rain pelted his back, wind lashed his face like a whip. Broken shingles flew past his head. He could no longer feel his fingers, only that he was holding on with everything he had, fingernails digging deep until they bled. In that chaos, the mother owl landed on a nearby beam, soaked, shivering, and for the first time, she let out a long, low cry. It sounded like the echo of an ancient forest. Not fear, but pain and helplessness. Then, something strange happened. She did not fly away. She settled closer, so close, right next to Edward's head. The wind blew her white feathers across his cheek. Through his trembling, he felt something touch his shoulder. Not wind, not rain, but the tip of her wane. Light, like a thank you. And there they were, man and bird, crouched over the nest together like 2 soldiers defending their last trench. The storm lasted until dawn. When the wind finally eased, Edward lifted his head. His coat was torn, blood trickled from his forehead, but the nest was intact. The 3 owlets were still there, trembling but alive. The mother owl flew back up to the beam, but never left the shed. Edward collapsed to the floor, breathless, tears mixing with the rain on his face. For the first time in years, he cried, not from pain, not from fear, but because he had touched something larger than life itself. A wordless trust between two different worlds. The next morning, the sky was an unexpected, brilliant blue. Edward placed the wooden nest on a higher shelf, reinforced the roof, and used an old sheet of plastic to block the wind. And in the morning sun, the mother owl stood beside him. She did not fly away. Her eyes met his, not the eyes of a wild animal anymore, but of a mother who understood some things cannot be done alone. And as Edward looked back at her, he whispered, "Luna." He did not know where the name came from. It came simply, gently, like the silver moon that silently watches over the night. From that moment on, her name was Luna, not a pet, not a companion, but something far more delicate, a spirit beside him. Chapter 5. Wings in the morning light. Time passed quietly, like chimney smoke drifting over rooftops. Winter slowly released its final breath of cold, and March brought the first warmth of the year, thawing the frost from the branches. In the old shed, the wooden nest remained, like a small fortress that had survived a war. A silent monument to a compassion that had no name. The three young owls grew by the day, their fledgling wings first awkward, then bolder with each new dawn. Edward no longer left food near the nest. He began teaching them how to hunt, not with words, but with patience. He released live field mice, trapped in cages, a good distance from the nest, then watched quietly from behind the fence. Luna was still there, watching her young take flight, never interfering, only circling above now and then, like a sliver of moon hanging in the daylight sky. Edward had changed, not in ways you could easily see. He still turned his potatoes, still fixed the fences, still lived alone in the red brick house at the end of the valley. But the villagers noticed he smiled more. He listened more closely when others spoke. He started carrying a notebook, not just for planting schedules, but for scattered thoughts. The wind blew backward tonight. Luna did not fly far. The third chick fears shadows, made him move the nest to face the other way. The old shed, once called the mouth of the night, now had a new roof, a straight wooden door, and inside it, life, quiet but real. Then one April morning, with the mist still floating over the fields, Edward woke to a strange sound, not the wind chimes, not the call of an owl. It was the sound of wings, 3 beats, then one, steady, strong. He put on his coat, stepped into the yard, and stood still. Across the pale pink sky, 4 white shapes cut through the morning light. Luna led the way. The 3 young owls followed, wings spread wide, their bodies gliding with grace on the spring breeze. No cries, no glances back, just one steady flight path, straight toward the distant woods, back to the world where wild things belong. Edward stood there for a long time, hands clenched at his sides. No tears, no sorrow, just a quiet space opening in his heart, not from loss, but from completion, as if he had closed a chapter, not with a final period, but with a pause. In the days that followed, the shed was quiet again, but Edward did not find it empty. He still swept the fallen leaves at the door, still left small pieces of meat on the beam, not to call anyone back, but as a greeting, a sign that said, "I'm still here, if you need me." Then, on the first full moon night after Luna's departure, Edward woke with a strange feeling in the palm of his hand, a soft chill, like a breeze that had just passed. He stepped outside, and there it was, a white figure perched on the beam, bathed in silver moonlight, no sound, no movement, just sitting there, like a memory returned, not to pull him into the past, but to whisper, "I remember." And so, every winter, when the cold wind began to bite, Edward would see an owl there again. Maybe it was Luna, maybe one of the young ones, maybe a descendant of a bond unseen, stretching beyond time and species. But he never called out. He simply watched from a distance, a hot cup of tea in hand, warmth in his chest like a glowing hearth. And he knew, life never truly leaves. It only changes form, changes wings, and flies on, leaving its footprints on the hearts of those who know how to wait. Chapter 6. The Final Voice. 1 year later, on a late afternoon in early winter, as the first soft snowflakes began to fall onto the rooftops, Edward sat by the fireplace. Across from him sat a young boy, the grandson of a neighbor visiting from town. The boy looked up and asked, "Have you ever seen a real owl?" "Sir." Edward smiled and slowly set his teacup on the table. In the flickering firelight, his tired eyes, worn by the weight of years, began to reflect something deeper. He started to tell the story, not with drama, not dressed up with wonder, but simply, as if laying down memories one by one, like moss settling gently on ancient stone. He spoke of an old shed long forgotten, of a white figure that stayed motionless through the winter, of 3 trembling lives curled beneath damp straw, and of a stormy night when the roof was torn away and a man and a wild bird stood side by side to keep life alive. The story ended with a single sentence, quiet, but heavy as the stone he once carried to rebuild that roof. "I could not save the whole world, but I saved one home." Silence filled the room for a long moment. Outside, the snow kept falling, and in that pause, it seemed everyone could hear the faint sound of wings passing gently through the heart. The boy asked no more questions. Edward sullied no more words. The story did not need a moral to tie it together. It simply sank in, like rain soaking into the earth. But if someone insisted on naming it, perhaps it would be this: motherhood, spoken without words, compassion, with no reason needed, and trust that crosses all boundaries of species. Luna, symbol of courage and love, left behind no monument, only memory, but that memory changed a man. Later that night, under the moonlight, Edward stepped outside to close the shed one last time. He looked up and saw a white shadow gliding across the sky. He could not say for sure whether it was real or a dream, but he smiled and slowly nodded, because deep down, he knew, when you love a creature with your whole heart, it never truly leaves.